Welcome to iTTV for Form 4 Science. The title of this lesson, The Functions of the Human Nervous System. In lesson 1 of this chapter, we looked at body coordination. And we said that body coordination was the responsibility of two main systems, the nervous system and the endocrine system. In this lesson, we want to start having a closer look at our nervous system, the parts in our nervous system, and the basic structures within it that allow us body coordination. Functions of the human nervous system: receive information from receptors, transmit and interpret the information, formulates responses to effector organs, controls and coordinates functions throughout the body, helps to maintain homeostasis. These are a few of the functions of the nervous system. Firstly, they must receive information from our receptors. All our skin layers, our eyes, our ears, our tongue, nose, all have receptors that can detect stimuli from the outside. Also internally, we have receptors to pick up changes in the internal environment. The temperature increases, too much water, the pH level is changing, too much glucose, things like this. Then we need to have what is said to be transmit and interpret the information. The information has to be sent to the brain or the central nervous system, where we analyze the information and try to work out what to do. Finally, we formulate responses, which means we work out how we're going to do something with response to the stimulus. All of this together helps to maintain homeostasis. This word homeostasis is tricky. What it means is to make sure that our body remains more or less constant. An example is to maintain our body temperature at 37 degrees Celsius. That is homeostasis. The body will do whatever it needs to do to maintain this temperature. If you're too cold, it will shiver. If you're too hot, it will sweat. Whatever it needs to do, it will do to maintain the homeostatic condition of the body. The main components of the nervous system. 1. The central nervous system, CNS, consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So, the first part of the nervous system we need to look at is called the central nervous system, which is a brain and a spinal cord. The central nervous system will interpret the information and send it to the organs concerned to carry out responses. So the main function of the CNS, or the central nervous system, is to receive information, analyze, and effect a response. So receive information, analyze, effect a response. That's the key to the CNS. The main components of the nervous system. 2. The peripheral nervous system, PNS, consists of the spinal nerves and cranial nerves. This is the second part of the nervous system. These are all the small nerves in our body that basically will connect back into the central nervous system. Cranial nerves. The 12 pairs of cranial nerves from the brain are connected to sensory organs in the head and internal organs, example, heart. So these are our cranial nerves. You need to remember that we have 12 pairs, and they come out from underneath our brain and go to all the parts of our face: eyes, cheeks, mouth, ears, and some of them go further into our body to our lungs and heart. These are the cranial nerves. They connect back to the brain. The spinal nerves. 31 pairs of spinal nerves from the spinal cord connected to the sensory and effector organs in the hands, legs, and the whole body, skeletal muscles, and glands. So these are our peripheral nerves. Basically, they come out this way from our spinal cord and go throughout our body. From the spinal cord to our legs, from the spinal cord to the end of our hands, from the spinal cord to the organs in our abdomen. They basically tell the spinal cord and the brain what is happening around the body. So remember the PNS, the peripheral nervous system, two sets of nerves, the cranial nerves from the brain and the spinal nerves from the spinal cord. Relationship between central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Connected to each other. Cranial nerves connect brain. Spinal nerves connect the spinal cord with skeletal muscles in hands and legs. Information carries to and from peripheral nervous system and central nervous system. So these are the main nerves. Now let's go up to the board and have a look at how these two systems are interconnected and work together. So we're having a look at the nervous system. Now what we're going to do this time is actually try to connect it all with a really nice large diagram. So we're looking at the nervous system. The nervous system. Now our nervous system, as we said, is broken into two main groups. The CNS and the PNS. This is the central nervous system. This consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Over here we have the PNS, which consists of cranial and spinal nerves. They're all coordinated together. The whole idea is this side here, function, analyze information. The function of these two send information to CNS. So send any information in the body to the CNS. So what does it really look like? Well, if we draw a diagram of it, well, we start with the brain and your spinal cord. So this is the brain and this is your spinal cord. So these are part of our CNS. Remember, their main function is to analyze information. Okay, so these two, this is the CNS. They do the analysis, but the information must come from the two sets of nerves, the peripheral and cranial nerves. Let's look at different color for this. Up here, coming down from the brain, these are our cranial. Remember, we have cranial here, okay, and we have roughly about 10 or 12 of these cranial nerves that come down. Then coming out from the spinal cord, going to all parts, say to the hands, going to the legs, going to the chest, okay, going to the chest area. All of these basically are our peripheral nerves. So these are our peripheral nerves from the spinal cord, which we call the spinal nerves. So information is going to travel from here up this way to the brain, and then from the brain back out to any effector muscles. So basically the whole idea is the peripheral system is connected to the central nervous system so that the central nervous system can figure out what to do send a message back through the peripheral system so that we can effect a response. The key things for you to remember are over here, the CNS, the main parts, brain, spinal cord, function, analyze. PNS, cranial, spinal, send information to the CNS. Basically connect the body to the CNS. Okay? Define nerve. A thread-like structure that contains many nerve cells. Now, a nerve is actually a bundle of nerve cells. We can't have our nerve cells individualized because we need to send a lot of information from one place to another place. It's a bit like a telephone wire. Inside one bundle or one nerve, you'll have many nerve cells. What is a neuron? The basic unit of the nervous system. So, inside our nerves are our nerve cells. These nerve cells are also known as neuron. They are the basic unit, the simplest thing in our nervous system. Structure of a neuron consists of a cell body containing a nucleus and cytoplasm. There are many fine nerve fibers called dendrons, dendrites, and axons. So this is the basic units or the basic parts of a neuron. We'll have a look at those in a moment and explain them a bit more clearly on the board, but understand that we have different parts of a neuron, the most important being the cell body, which has the nucleus. So this is the part that controls all the activities of the neuron. What are dendrons? Dendrons are nerve fibers that carry impulses to the cell body. What are axons? Axons are nerve fibers that carry impulses away from the cell body. They are surrounded by a thick layer of fatty substance called myelin sheath, which acts as an insulator and source of food. The myelin sheath is broken up, speeding up the impulses. What are dendrites? Dendrites are small terminal branches from the free ends of both the axons and dendrons. There are three types of neurons. 1. Sensory neurons. Connected to receptor or sensory organs. Transmit impulses from the sensory organs to the central nervous system. So we've had a look, or we've given you some information on the neuron and the neuron structure. The first of the neurons we want to have a look at is called the sensory neuron. Let's go up to the board and have a look at what a sensory neuron is. You must know the structure of the three main types of neurons because it's very important that you recognize them in examinations. So let's look at the first one, which is called the sensory neuron. In its basic form, it starts over here at the receptor. From the receptor, you have little branches coming in. These branches are what we call dendrites. Now, from the dendrite, we have a line going back like this, and the impulse travels in this direction. We are going to the cell body. To cell body. If we go to the cell body, which is over here, this is our cell body. If we go to the cell body, this area here is called a dendron. Any area of a nerve fiber or nerve cell that goes to the cell body is called a dendron. This is the cell body up here. This controls activity. From here, we shoot out and continue, and then dendrites here, and over here is the CNS over here. So we are going from receptor to CNS. That is the key for a sensory neuron. Receptor to CNS. This area here that goes from the cell body to the CNS is known as an axon. So the axon is from the cell body to away from the cell body. Let's say that. Let's keep it simple. Anything away from the cell body is called an axon. Anything going to the cell body is a dendron. Now, how do you recognize a sensory neuron? Well, the cell body is actually outside. It is not inside the main fiber. It is placed outside so that it's not in the way, so that the impulse can travel at full speed. That's how you recognize it. Now let's move on to the second of our neurons. Number 2, motor neurons. Connected to effectors, muscles or glands. Transmit impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors, which results in a response. So the second of our neurons is called the motor neuron. Let's go up to the board and sketch out a motor neuron. Now, a motor neuron is slightly different. It starts with the cell body. Okay, it starts with the cell body, which we will sketch like this. So coming out from the cell body, we're going away from the cell body. So here we have the axon. Now, remember the axon, as we said earlier, has a sheath on top of it. This is known as the myelin sheath. Function of the myelin sheath, this is for insulation, food, speed up, impulse. So this is the cell body, which will be in the CNS. So let's mark this inside here. CNS. We go from the CNS through the axon, and right at the end here we get our little dendrites, and over here will be, let's use a different color over here. Over here we'll have our muscle, which is basically our effector. So where are we going from? We're going from the CNS to the muscle or the effector. Very different, okay? So let's quickly take a look at this. Here we're going from receptor to CNS. Here we're going from CNS to effector. First difference. Number 2, here the cell body is outside. Here the cell body is the beginning. In a sensory neuron, we have a dendron to the cell body and the axon away from the cell body. Here, because we start at the cell body, we only have an axon, no dendron whatsoever. Okay? And this has a myelin sheath on it. Remember, insulation, food, speed up, impulse. The key here, once again, is where to where. Receptor to CNS, sensory neuron. CNS to effector, motor neuron. Make sure you are clear about this, because this is what will come out in the exam all the time. Where does a sensory neuron send the impulse to? What does a motor neuron do? You've got to know. Sensory is receptor to CNS. Motor, CNS to effector. Make sure you know these two. Also, make sure you know the function of that myelin sheath, because it's also a common thing that they ask you about in examinations. Relay neurons, located in the central nervous system, connect sensory neurons to motor neurons and transmit impulses between these two neurons. So the third of our neurons is basically called a relay neuron, sometimes called an intermediate neuron. Let's have a look at how this one looks and works. So that's number 1. Over here is number 2. Let's do number 3 over here, which is called the relay. Now the relay looks a bit like a fried egg. Basically, it's just a cell body with dendrites coming in and dendrites going out. Basically, on one side, impulses come in from the sensory neuron, and on the other side, impulses come out. What they basically do is connect sensory to motor. You come from the sensory into the relay, out to the motor. That's its main function, to connect these two together so that the impulse just goes whoop, like that. Okay, so remember the 3: sensory neuron, motor neuron, and relay neuron. Remember where they are sending impulses to. Remember where they are sending impulses from. Very, very important. Let's try a question. What are the 2 parts of the nervous system? So remember, we talked about it right at the beginning. The nervous system contains 2 main parts. One for the analysis, one to connect the body to the analyzing area. So write down the 2 main parts for me. Let's check the answer. Answer: the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. What is a neuron? So what is a neuron? Okay, like when we talk about the cell, we say the cell is the basic unit of all living things. So what is a neuron? Have you written it out? Let's check the answer. The basic unit of the nervous system. Question: what is the function of the sensory neuron? So now we're talking about the sensory neuron, which we looked at over there. Now the key here is that you understand what the sensory neuron does. Make sure you're clear about it. Make sure you know where the impulse is coming from and where it is going. That's what we really want to know. Write it out. No thinking. Write it on the paper. Have you done this? Let's check the answer. Answer: to carry information from receptor to the central nervous system. So let's do a summary of this lesson. Number 1, you got to know the function of the nervous system for humans: to receive, transmit, and interpret. We receive stimulus, we transmit impulses, we interpret the information. Remember the 2 main parts, the CNS and the PNS. Remember, the CNS is the brain and the spinal cord. The PNS is the spinal nerve and cranial nerve. Remember the structure of neurons: dendrons towards the cell body, axons away from the cell body, dendrites, small branches at the start or at the end. Remember the 3 types of neurons and their functions: sensory neurons, receptor to CNS, motor neurons, CNS to effector, relay neurons, connect sensory neurons to motor neurons. The similarities of the 3 neurons: they all transmit impulses. So remember all of these. You've got to be able to remember them and verbalize them just like I did. You've got to be able to go through it. Look, I can do it now. What are the two parts of this nervous system? CNS, brain, spinal cord, function, analyze. Peripheral nervous system, cranial nerve, spinal nerve, connect the body to the CNS. What is a neuron? Basic unit. What does the neuron contain? Axon, dendron, dendrite, myelin sheath. What is a sensory neuron? Receptor to CNS. What is a motor neuron? CNS to effector. What is a relay neuron? Connects sensory nerve to motor nerve. You've got to be able to do it like that. Be able to produce all the key information just like that. Practice it. Make sure you know all the key things about this system, the nervous system. Print out this slide that you have on your screen. Keep it as in a file. Make sure we build up all these summaries because they are the key information that we need. And remember, the most important thing, like I said, you've got to be able to try to reproduce the information, the key information in the summary like I do it to you. It's not hard. There's not a lot of information there. Okay? If you can remember this, you will basically be able to answer anything that they ask you about the nervous system. That's all the time we have for this lesson. Thank you for watching iTTV.